Good afternoon, and greetings from the team at Opposition International. We're proud to host this virtual event for Partners for Democracy Day titled Opposing and Resisting Democratic Erosion. Our heartfelt thanks go to the Global Democracy Coalition, which, in collaboration with International IDEA, has professionally organized these events to coincide with the third summit of the democracies in Seoul, Korea. Our broadcast emanates from the Center for Social Innovation here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. But before we delve into the program, let's begin with a land acknowledgement, a solemn recognition of the profound relationship between the Indigenous First Nations people and the very territories upon which we now stand. We acknowledge this land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We also recognize that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Now, let's explore the rich agenda we've prepared for you. We'll briefly examine the figures on democracy erosion, drawing insights from esteemed sources such as Freedom House, The Economist, and the Enlightening Varieties of Democracy Project. Our speakers, Owen Lippert, Director of Opposition International, and Hannah Cho, a Toronto activist, will set the stage by discussing the emerging role of new voices among youth and the diaspora here in Toronto. Following this, we have a series of 4 interviews, each delving into the challenges faced by the opposition in confronting democratic erosion. Our first interviewee, Professor Nigel Fletcher, is from King's College in the UK and promises thought-provoking insights. And finally, to conclude our program, we'll hear a succinct yet powerful statement from Pyrou Chung. Pyrou, associated with the East-West Management Institute, is a tireless researcher and advocate for democracy and Indigenous women in the Mekong Delta region.
How did you get to this point where you start Oppositions International?
Well, the reason I started Opposition International is that I saw that the main institutions that were assisting democracy were really kind of restrained in the kind of assistance they could provide to opposition political parties. Because if you are in another country as an employee of the government, you have to be a little careful as to not to appear partisan, and particularly if that would involve any kind of conflict with the government. Where I thought that there was some scope to help opposition parties if you were careful, and so we will help all parties, and be they green parties, be they faith-based parties, be they environmental parties, or some other issues. And so what we're trying to do is fill a gap that we're going to deal directly with parties. So I'm going to help them with what their real issues are. It's everybody's got long-term plans as to how they're going to socially mature, but what they really want is help in getting elected, being able to deliver accountability if they're in opposition, to bring forward new ideas, and to be able to keep the chance alive that power can shift from one party, one coalition, to another coalition. And the very fact that change is possible is a huge restraint upon authoritarian behavior. Let me ask one more question to you. And I know this is unfair.
No.
I know that you aren't claiming to speak for the young people in Toronto, but what do you think young people in Toronto are thinking about democracy right now? And what maybe in some ways you think they may be more engaged, not just with Opposition International, but with all the agencies and think tanks and sometimes very courageous individuals in Toronto.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, it's hard to stand for all young people. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for most young people. Well, for say, focusing on, say, like my generations, we stand for our freedom. And talking about democracy, a lot of things that we have to talk about freedoms and rights, human rights, especially human rights and freedom. That's basically the main point of like how, not just young people, I would say like everybody, but for say like young people, it's just people who are more doing things without thinking. In a way, and we just stand out of a line and without knowing actually. But I do have advice for our generation is do step out and also do see the whole picture before you have something to say and to do. Get to know the whole story, the whole reason why behind everything, and then that would be a better way of how everyone would understand the democracy and global problems.
So thank you, Hannah. I think we'll see you at the conclusion again.
Okay.
But let's now go on to the next phase.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to say as to the Summit of Democracies and the bigger picture as we round up here?
Yes. I think the thing that I'd want to emphasize is that it's very easy for those of us who are privileged enough to live in proper democracies with free political expression to take for granted the fact that we have free opposition and that we are able to choose who governs us. And sometimes to complain about the quality of that opposition and of the government as well, and to forget the fact that there are many countries around the world where that is not the case, and we do have a problem with countries around the world where opposition simply isn't tolerated.
To get past Monday, which is the presentation, I think we have enough here that it'll whet people's appetite to come back, and we'll have a fuller version of this interview on the website separately. So it's for the conference, we just want to get people's attention, then show them something more, and in that, I really thank you so much for taking time today.
I think that this is not just an interesting academic exercise. It's not just something that can work to try and improve the quality of opposition in current democracies. It's also a reminder, I think, that having an opposition and having the freedom of expression to criticize the government and to offer an alternative to voters is a fundamental human right, and one that is really important in actually making a democracy a free and fair democracy. And so I think in that sense, opposition has a fundamental importance that is even more important to those countries where, at least on the face of it, they don't have one. And I think that is something which, if there is a wider purpose for the work that I do, that you do, and that many of those attending the conference do, it is to try and ensure that those basic freedoms of political expression that we take for granted can be spread and can be available universally. In the UK, we've arrived at this constitutional settlement through a mixture of civil wars, revolutions, and very incremental evolution of our constitution. And there have been many mistakes and as I say, bloody battles along the way. So what I've tried to say to our colleagues overseas who've sought to have these discussions with us is that if they can use the UK's experience and many of the mistakes that we've made over the years and many of the problems that we've had, if they can learn from those to actually try and shortcut the process a little bit and try and avoid making those same mistakes, then they can actually do it perhaps a bit better than we've managed over the last sort of 500 years or so.
I have here today Joe Allchin, who is an award-winning journalist, had been a senior writer for the Dhaka Tribune, had been a journalistic star in several cities throughout Southeast Asia. I'm asking Joe today just if he would give us an overview of how he saw democracy in Asia, using examples, drawing upon his experience, and to offer the viewers his insights after covering Asia for many years. Joe, the floor is yours. Thank you. And I just thought, do you have any sense of where that dynamic of the Islamic parties becoming mainstream democratic parties is headed?
That's a good question. I think it's right to say that Sheikh Hasina turned on them, and in the instance of Jamaat Islami, the largest Islamist party in Bangladesh and most successful one, it was officially at least over their refusal to accept the constitution of Bangladesh. And that also points us in an important direction, which is the weakness of institutions that in somewhere like Bangladesh, not only in the logistical sense of running an election or counting votes or what's termed as a caretaker government to oversee that electoral process, but the very idea of the state and what it should be doing and what the very idea of the nation is not kind of fully formed. So in a way, Bangladesh's trajectory as a democracy has always been weak. I mean, we often look back and say that Sheikh Hasina has sunken democracy in Bangladesh, and that before it was a sort of functioning democracy. But in many ways, it's just sort of alternated between two ladies who represent two kind of families, without really the institutions of state that kind of hold it together. Now, you could say that someone as powerful and forceful as Sheikh Hasina is would subvert that anyway. But I recall covering the 2014 election in Bangladesh and interviewing insurrectionist BNP, who were at that point, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, who at that point were threatening to boycott the election and protesting. Rightly so, was a one-sided or unfair process. When I asked them where their manifesto is that they were protesting on behalf of, or they wanted to uphold, or they wanted to advance for the Bangladesh people, they didn't have one. They said only when we have a position or situation in which we could win an election or take power will we have a manifesto. And I think that again hints at a quite structural weakness, which is really worth bearing in mind when we look at the fragility of democracies and the vitality of democracies going forward. Is the vital importance of institutions that make this work? Because in Bangladesh, what you have, and I'll briefly also apply this to Myanmar, if I may. You have political leaders or dynasties or families. You notice throughout much of South and Southeast Asia, there's, families and dynasties which are very powerful. I'm, looking at Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, obviously, Myanmar. All the legitimacy is conferred through inheritance of dynastic a dynastic mandate, if you will. And as such, in somewhere like Bangladesh, the inability of state institutions to avoid political interference is taken for granted. I mean, it's not even it's barely even recognized that essentially the two parties who are competing and exchanging have exchanged power since democracy returned in 1991. It's just a given that it's between two figureheads. And similarly in Myanmar, which I've covered quite a bit as well, the legitimacy conferred on Aung San Suu Kyi is largely through her father. Much like Bangladesh, her father is the independence hero, and as a result, that forms some sort of unifying facet to this essentially liberal political parties, the NLD in Myanmar and the Awami League in Bangladesh. And so, and with Islamist parties in Bangladesh, they're in a position, Jamaat Islami are in a position where they won't recognize the constitution of Bangladesh, and so without that superstructure to both do those practical elements like running an election or deciding its winners, etc. It seems very challenging to move beyond strongman politics or dynastic politics, where legitimacy is simply conferred by through inheritance.
And do you see the opposition parties in Myanmar getting their act together in terms of unity and saying that we're beyond just bringing back any particular dynastic house?
I do, in the sense that I think a lot of Myanmar's answers, whether it's beneficial or whether it's ideal or not, will come from sort of a federal system, which is represented essentially now by ethnic rebel armies in the hinterlands of the country, and I think that points at a very interesting, or promotes what you're saying, really, in that essentially the idea of a federal Myanmar will probably be the strongest unifying factor for a movement forward, a democratic movement forward, because essentially the Myanmar military is the only one to have that kind of institutional strength to, at the point of a gun, force a unification or unity of the country. Without that, and whereas obviously Myanmar being a very diverse nation or your country, I think that with the successes on the battlefield of the various ethnic armed groups, will probably help to promote a federal Burma or Myanmar, which I think is probably the best hope in the long run. Whether they receive any support or whether they are able to not escape the clutches of what Myanmar's military intelligence have previously managed to do, which is to sow division between these different, often very different groups, is another matter altogether. Both with when you look at but similarly with the problem with the central Myanmar opposition parties like the NLD and across the board with dynastic politics, it makes choosing successor leaders very, very difficult. And we see that in Bangladesh, where and monarchies in full stop, and historically have always, it's very, successful leaders very rarely have ideal children to succeed them. So, how the NLD are able to choose a successor once Suu Kyi, is no longer fit for office will be, remains to be seen. And we've seen that in Bangladesh, that, expectations of Hasina's or indeed Khaleda Zia's ability to choose a successor and keep the party together without what I was talking about earlier about having an ideological base or a manifesto is probably quite difficult, or without the institutions of being able to choose a leader in those circumstances, a new leader. It seems to be a major problem. And all that comes back down to the lack of institutions of state to allow these opposition parties to exist and select, their path forward or leaders and ideas in free and fair fashion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. The one of the things that many scholars and writers look at is how do we get beyond the cult of personality or cult of family in these democratic institutions, and I'm not sure I have the answer or anybody has the answer. But what I have observed is that parties, and in most cases opposition parties, because they don't have any charismatic leader, for which they probably suffer a bit at the polls, are forced to come up with more the policy-minded solutions, or at least an emphasis on certain aspects of social welfare, and that's really where I think the fate of democracy is in need of strengthening. One of the things that I really needed in terms of our presentation is a comment and analysis about the situation in Ukraine and Russia vis-a-vis democracy. But I think also what has come up for both countries is the issue of what does it take for a pluralistic political scene to exist, that is multiple parties. And one of the issues is how could that be financed through the diaspora, or because that would be the one source of funds that could possibly keep an opposition party afloat in either countries. Anyway, please, Dymitro, take the floor from me and offer your own perspective on these issues.
First of all, talking about, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Yes.
I would say, talking about Russian opposition impact, we must understand who this organization or people. As far as we know right now, most powerful communities like Forum Free Russia, Anti-Military Committee of Russia, and Navalny team. We know these people like Garry Kasparov, Mikhailo Khodorkovsky, Lyubov Sobol, Ilya Ponomarev, Sergei Guryev, and Marat Gelman, and etc. Those guys have 3 streams about how to lead Russia after war. And I would say the problem of just to see data, the problem of these 3 different opposition streams, they have different vision about Ukraine war with Russia and about future after war time for an example, Khodorkovsky and Garry Kasparov is one cluster. They're looking for some model of Russia to create some council in parliament and eliminate president role. And it's going to be like parliamentary democracy, like for example, Canada. Ilya Ponomarev, this is former member of parliament and advisor of Putin. His group more focused on how to defeat Russia. And we see many military groups, private army who attack Russian border province right now. And these guys, I would say, more up to control of this group of opposition Russia. Their role in Ukraine war depend on Ukraine directly because all of them are in exile or in Ukraine. And everything that they can do, it depends on situation after war is over. That's why it's hard to estimate Russian opposition impact. Yes, they can be free voice of Russia maybe, and they're very interested to work alongside with Ukrainian authorities and army to defeat a Putin regime and get rid of this autocracy. I know some group of them, like for example, Ilya Ponomarev, located in Kiev and Allchin. Garry Kasparov and Lyubov Sobol, they are located over Europe or US. Also, we know some people from Russia in US, and they're doing some research and provide some core forum, and they also working on to create like alternative voice of Russian vision and Russian news for Russian citizens inside Russia, because as you know, it's completely closed and culture society. People in Russia doesn't like fully under propaganda, and they don't see, I would say, they don't accept any information from Ukrainian news or Western news because we enemy for Russia. And these guys in opposition leaders, they can be voice, and the Russian society might be able to hear. Talking about Ukrainian side, before war in February 2022, President Zelensky team has a lower rate of trust since he was re-elected. And situation was in the moment when people start thinking about a re-election before term, and all opposition was so strong to start pre-election campaign. Invasion happened, and right now all power in president hands and his team. And actually, Zelensky has around 3-5 people in his office who control everything. It's more a manual governance as like model, and he has majority of member of parliament in Ukrainian parliament, which can do whatever he wants and avoid any legislation that require president office. We have situation right now when President Zelensky term will be over in March, but we don't have election in Ukraine as it should be under Constitutional Act. And Ukraine Constitution said that president will be acting as a president until next election, as well as a parliament. So technically speaking, it's going to be same power and same regime in Ukraine too. As we know, Russia took selection today and yesterday, and it's going to be Putin will be re-elected as many times before, and then this year will be more and less about defense for Ukraine and offense for Russia, and it's going to be back and forth. And again, Ukraine very depend on financial situation about army supply and any financial to support government model, because all public services depend on donor money or credit money or grant money, as well as a military assistance, like salaries for soldiers, social assistance, etc. Main like would say events will be taking place after main election in the world, like France, European Union, US in November, and then depend on situation which will be in battlefield in this moment will be I would say will be condition that will depend on U.S. new president position as well, because
Needs to hinge on America's direction. That's for sure.
exactly, and right now the Ukraine government doing a lot of mistake, because since Biden was the vice president in Ukraine in 2014 under Obama term, right? He was responsible for Ukraine since Obama all term. It's 5 years. Right now he's president of US, and for this reason, all I would say member of parliaments and president of Zelensky and his team more focused on Democratic side of the US. And they had a very big problem with the Republican connections and Republican side. Right now, it's a big problem for Ukrainian government to establish a good connection with opposition in US, because 2 years of war, because the Democrat Party in the power and Biden, everything was focused on this Senate and this power in US. Right now, as you know, financial situation in US in the hold, and Ukraine suffering of any supply from US. But everybody understands who is the main candidate for election, Biden and Trump, and who has more chances to become new president. So many groups like, I would say, many lobby groups in Ukraine, like in February and March, will be focusing on developing a relationship and like kind of relationship with Republican that should not hurt same relationship with Democrats. And Ukraine become a hostage of U.S. local politics in this instance.
What would you say is the awareness of democracy and the democracy issue and the long-term benefits of democracy among the populace and then civil society in both Russia and Ukraine? Is there an ingrained understanding and push for a more democratic system? That's always been an ongoing question that extends beyond actually whatever the polling companies ever seem to find out.
It's a good question. The main problem why Russian population doesn't recognize Ukrainian people, because we have different system. Ukraine is a very young system with a lot of mistakes, a rough democracy, but still democracy. We had 6 presidents elected, and nobody had dominate power during 30 years of independence. Versus Russia has one leader without any opposition. As you know, recently Mr. Navalny was killed, and we have a couple of guys who represent, like Allchin, for example, who is in prison in same conditions. We don't know what happened with them. So democracy in Russia technically it doesn't exist. People who in exile, opposition leaders, they might be democracy holders or it's a creator, but their ability to create democratic seats in Russia depend on Putin regimes. If regime is over, or West and Ukraine will be able to change Russia regime, I don't know actually how. In this case, Russia might be able to have chance to have democracy in 5-10 years later, because why it's very doubtable, because for example, I worked in Moscow some years ago, and many people in Russia, I've been in Russia, I've been in Rostov and St. Petersburg, surprisingly don't accept even Navalny as a future leader for Russia. They like to see leader with strong power, with military power, who can protect them from fake enemy. And this is questions how to refocus society to democratic values, Because we can bring democracy in Russia, but everything will depend on local community. If people like it, they will choose these leaders. Because if we will eliminate Putin, it doesn't change system. This system was built for 27 years since Putin was elected, even further in the Soviet Union. And Russia's strategy is like empire and successor of Soviet Union, and people like it. I spoke with people in Moscow, in Petersburg, and they were very excited and very enjoyable to understand the most, how they think, powerful country in the world. And right now they even more enjoyable because they see how Putin can threat West, US, and this is questions how to do democracy in Russia in this condition. In Ukraine, in contrast, we have very pro-democratic society. Since 2014, by the way, we have a bunch of volunteering group, NGOs and non-government organizations, local, international. And as experience show during 2014-2022, country can exist even without government because people responsible in local, provincial, and federal level, and Ukrainian society is able to fulfill organizational framework to solve problem in local level and national level. The problem of democratic issues in Ukraine is that before war, you mentioned about financial political party. Political system in Ukraine was in transitional pattern when many oligarchs, people who was nobody in 19th, I would say, took factories, firms, companies, politicians from Soviet Union or their parents, and they become billionaires and millionaires, and they have puppet party. And every election they create new party and give young people opportunity to be member of parliament, but actually those people don't have any freedom and power like here in Canada or in US. So technically speaking, this is like my oligarchs has specific group in parliament that solve the problem. They avoid special legislation, they protect corporate interest, and civic society was fighting with them. That's why we had Maidan revolution in 2014.
Yeah.
Right now,
I know it was actually in Georgia where that took place. It was very interesting.
I was at this moment in Ukraine. I remember everything. I was injured, but anyway. But the good things about Ukrainian democracy, people and society is ready. People ready. People value freedom, expression of speech, expression of religion. People understand what does it mean freedom. They fight and donate own blood and life. You know, it's high level of democracy. I would say sacrifice. When you have to fight.
I'm here with Dr.Nazmul Kalimullah, who is the head of Janipop, which is one of the oldest and most influential of the election observation organizations in Bangladesh. His expertise, however, extends well beyond Bangladesh and has served in missions in Nepal, in India, in South Africa, and I'm sure many other places. Anyway, he has a long time interest in democracy erosion, not just in Bangladesh, but in countries throughout the globe. And so I'm asking him here kind of a open-ended question. Given what's happening as reported by various democracy index reports, what is the situation now? What might be done? And what would you recommend to the Summit of Democracies people as to things they could be doing to improve the situation? Over to you.
Thank you, Owen, my long-standing friend and defender of democracy. Is the founder of Opposition International. We had the opportunity to work together in Bangladesh when he was country rep of NDI, National Democratic Institute for International Affairs. I had long-standing working relationship with NDI as well as IRI, International Republican Institute, in Bangladesh and elsewhere. I had the opportunity to observe elections in Mozambique, in Zambia, in Nigeria, in Egypt, in the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, in Hong Kong, in Sri Lanka, Nepal, in United Kingdom, United States of America, and other parts of the world. And with this background, I'd like to say that, the voice of dissent and its space must be protected within and without. And it is impossible to retain the space and extend it further within a national confine until unless international actors who wants to act as protector of plural space intervenes. And this type of overture acts as kind of deterrent. Mere issuance of statement is not good enough. And if international community wants to act as savior, protector, and mentor, they must come out of this cocoon or shell of issuance of statements only. It should be meaningful exercise. In countries like Nigeria, we could find a protege, a character such as the then Chief Election Commissioner, Professor Jega. He was inspirational, I would say, role model, Chief Election Commissioner. So was Ian Session in India. So we look forward to having such role model idols all over the world. And people like Nelson Mandela or Alexei Navalny are best examples. So the torch which they ignited must be carried forward by people who wants to follow the footsteps of Professor Jega or T.N. Session within the electoral integrity domain. In countries like Egypt, it's very difficult. In countries like Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, it is more challenging. So, wherever you are, doesn't matter whether you are near Oceania or in Africa, or for that matter in Asia, the context conditions a lot of things, and challenges also vary. So, against such backdrop, we must sort of agree upon certain issues and certain premises which must be treated as cardinal faith, and axes must be used to grind certain ideals which cannot be compromised. For example, in Hong Kong, in the first legislative council election, we found that Communist Party of China advised its followers in the new position which was left by the Britishers, i.e. Hong Kong, especially at Mr. Road, to take photograph of the ballot using their cell phones. And as they've done it, so it was kind of a compromise with the spirit of the universal adult franchise and also secrecy of the ballot. So such deviations must not be sort of kept under the sleeve. This type of deviations must be put forward in the front line and must be combated. Complex bureaucracies also creates decoy. Then the whole process must be carefully observed, and election assessors and observers must call spade a spade. It's of course not a matter of principle. So, wishy-washy statement doesn't help. And, moral and ideological basis matters a lot. Once when Margaret Thatcher was the leader of the House in House of Commons, Neil Kinnock was the opposition leader. He stated, I quote, "Right Honourable Lady, your might is not right." And Neil Kinnock, of course, Neil Kinnock was Her Majesty's loyal opposition. So, he didn't hesitate to state what is right in broad daylight in front of the august House of Commons. So, such examples must be sort of cited and also be popularized. Thank you.
I work with the East-West Management Institute as the director of the Urban Development Initiative, which is an Asia-wide program looking at human rights, environmental justice, and the nexus between digital transformations. So what are the issues that need political dialogue as well as civil society dialogue? I mean, fair and equitable societies. In any form of democracy, without fair and equitable dialogues between citizens, regardless of their position within existing political power structures, it's fundamental to every issue that affects our world, not just the politics that govern it. And how does the absence of restrictions on political pluralism affect environmental and Indigenous advocacy? Indigenous peoples comprise of almost 400 million just in Asia alone. And that population is based upon census recently conducted, the latest census, from all of the nations that delineate and allow ethnic communities and Indigenous communities to identify. That number is hugely underrepresented in terms of political representation. There is no ability for Indigenous peoples to break through to the barriers that would allow them to engage in civic political situations that would offer them rights to be able to assert their self-determination, as well as access to lands and territories of which is incorporated into that identity. The absence of them within these dialogues and within political spaces fundamentally reduces our ability as a society to include their knowledge and their ways of knowing and governing our environmental systems into approaches that would actually address pressing climate issues. I think for Indigenous peoples, especially across the Mekong, where they are proactively invisibilized through other sustainable development goals and initiatives, they are marginalized to the extent where the development that impacts their lands and resources are basically continually being excluded. And this has been the case from time immemorial. And it continues to be the case. And with the introduction of digitization of public services and other government and other technical facilities that are assisting us to make better decisions, as we're being told they are, it really does circumvent an inability for it widens the gap. It widens the gap for Indigenous peoples to enter into these spaces because of the fundamental marginalizations that they are forced into and that are existing for them. So do you see the political landscape continuing to restrict the airing of environmental and Aboriginal issues, and how might different government-opposition relationships improve awareness? There has been increasing shrinking of civic space, which includes fundamental freedoms, rights, and liberties all across the region. And since the pandemic and the immediate rush to digitize public services, it has actually meant that freedoms of expression are so much more easily controlled, which has amplified and increased surveillance through digital spaces. This has compounded and contributed to extreme authoritarianism within the region and the pretext of national security. And so as this authoritarian control and fear-mongering to a certain extent gets spread across the region in existing, as the expansion of this digitization and the lack of democracy and polarity within existing countries such as Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and now militarization in Myanmar, these power dynamics are too outweighed. They're too strong. And it's very, very challenging for opposition, any type of opposition, to be created and challenge these existing power structures and political institutions that are often fiefdoms in themselves. And we need to dismantle them, but it's necessarily to do that in a peaceful way. And that has become more and more challenging. And the narratives that are being expressed throughout the region and the discrimination, the racial hatred that is being perpetuated is actually increasing these divides, and it's making it even more and more challenging to generate alternative ideals of what and how we should govern our societies.
Thank you all for joining and contributing to today's event. Thank you especially Global Democracy Coalitions assisted by International IDEA based in Stockholm in Sweden. And thanks for Center for Social Innovations in Toronto for the facility. It's located in 192 Spadina Avenue. And let's uphold the spirit for Democracy Days.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, there are a lot of people we should also thank, but we only have so much time here. But thank you, thank Shelton, thank all the people at IDEA that have been so helpful, and as well our friends at Counterpart who originally set up the idea of having these events. So thank you all.
And in conclusion, Thomas Mann, the renowned novelist, once wrote, "In our times, the destiny of humanity presents its meaning in political terms." This sentiment of Mann's resonates deeply, especially when we consider the delicate balance between government and opposition within successful democracies. Columbia professor Adam Przeworski aptly highlights the specific challenge. Successful democracies are those in which institutions make it difficult to fortify a temporary advantage. The key, says the professor, lies in mitigating institutional advantages, ensuring that every interest trusts the system enough to accept defeat while maintaining hope for future victories. Opposition International asserts that healthy democracies don't suppress the conflict between government and opposition. Instead, they seek to resolve disputes fairly. The playing field must remain level, accessible to all, and recognized as such in order to foster trust and participation. Thank you, and may our message resonate with fellow participants as we all seek to stem the erosion of democracy worldwide.